under the heading Disclosure to Support Police Investigations, presented by Ms Gray and Mr Bartlett. Tabled and noted was the paper on disclosure to support police investigations, passing of material to law enforcement. SEG declined to approve the submission of the paper on disclosure support for police investigations to the board, noting further work and assurance was required in relation to Horizon data assurance. So questions arising from these two documents. Looking at the position as it stood before the SEG paper, why was the board's permission required to share Horizon data with law enforcement agencies in a witness statement or as an exhibit?
I think we touched on this yesterday, and the view of the board was that they wanted to have visibility for any kind of data that was being provided to law enforcement agencies, and that they wanted sight of the sort of scale of the requests and indeed how that was being operated. And I think we described yesterday that there was that effective trade-off between requests from LEAs and the requirement to conform to those requests, whilst at the same time visibility, quite rightly from the board, that they wanted to understand where we were engaging with law enforcement agencies, what type of issue was being displayed, and to continue with that. And I think that is why the SEG declined to approve the submission of the paper. I think there was some surprise, my recollection from the meeting, where there was some surprise at the scale of requests in terms of the 22 law enforcement agencies and the 33 requests. I think that came as a surprise to colleagues. I think we were of the opinion that it was in the ones and twos in terms of requests for information on this sort of scale, and I think that was the primary discomfort, was the size and the number of requests that were coming forward, and therefore a better understanding of and a bigger understanding of the picture was requested.
Well, in fact, and we'll come to this in a moment, is what the minutes note is that further work and assurance was required in relation to Horizon data assurance, not to know more about the number or nature of the requests. It's about assuring, presumably, the quality, accuracy and integrity of Horizon data that this is referring to.
That too, certainly, but I think it was more a case of understanding the bigger picture. I think there wasn't that level of understanding at the SEG, and I think we needed to understand more broadly, what was being requested, in what form, and how we were going to supply that information, and what reassurance that we had that we were doing this in an appropriate way. So yes, I think there were certainly questions over data assurance, but I think it was a broader assurance that the SEG were also looking for.
You said, and one can understand why the board might want to understand the scale of Horizon disclosure for law enforcement purposes and to have visibility. That is satisfied by the provision of information to the board. What this describes is that the board had to give its permission.
I don't recall having specific cases come to the board for that particular, to respond to that particular issue. I think this is still fairly uncharted territory for the organisation in its sort of modern guise in terms of how we supply information to LEAs. So I don't think we'd had a breakdown, certainly at the board, not in my time, of a specific case and then got under the skin of how and what we are supplying and in what context. So I think this is the start of that journey, for want of a better word, in the sense that this is the ACNI coming forward with a proposal.
I'm sorry, Mr. Reid, I don't want to make it sound as if Mr. Beer and I are Starsky and Hutch, but I just don't follow that, because all those requests for information from the police, the 33 of them, the vast majority of them presumably couldn't have occurred without the board already having sanctioned a report to the police.
Well, I guess the way that I understand it is that the police have obviously requested information. There will be a reason why they
Yeah,
do that.
but what I mean is once the board are asked to sanction a report to the police, they obviously know that there is a case which is now being investigated by the police.
Yes.
The way that the paper put it was that there are currently 22 police forces requesting or awaiting horizon-based evidence across 33 police investigations. The current approach is that the board will need to be approached in the majority of these matters when the data is able to be shared, as and when the data is able to be shared. Was the organisation simply not processing these requests?
Yeah, I think that's
essentially sort of paralysed.
I think that's the point that's being made.
Do you know whether the Post Office had disclosed what Mr. Cameron had summarised at that meeting that we looked at yesterday? Do you remember the January 2023 meeting, the quarterly meeting with UKGI and DBT, where he said that the Horizon data is not sufficient to do an investigation in many cases? Do you know whether that kind of disclosure had been made to the police service?
I'm not sure.
Do you know whether ACNI had in fact provided, before June 2024, Horizon data and transaction analysis to the police?
I don't recall a specific case of that coming to the SEG or to the board. No.
How was, in the 33 cases, the Post Office ensuring that the Horizon data that it proposed to provide to the police service was sufficient and that the transaction analysis that went with it was sound?
I don't have, as I say, this is work that's in train. I don't have the specific detail of that.
The proposal that Mr. Bartlett and Miss Gray made by way of their SEG report was to essentially devolve responsibility for permission to in-house counsel and to Mr. Bartlett. And one of the reasons given was that the ACNI bring, quote, considerably more objective rigour to assessing evidence. How do ACNI bring considerably more objective rigour to assessing evidence?
I think the majority of the individuals who work within the ACNI, which I think, as we discussed yesterday, is a relatively new organisation. Within that team, there are primarily individuals who've worked in law enforcement outside of the Post Office. And I think the assumption is therefore being made that these are individuals who have the right training and the right experience of law enforcement more specifically than perhaps was the case in the past. And I think what is being demonstrated here is a transition from the old security teams that operated within the Post Office historically, which were made up of a variety of different individuals, and the more professional approach that's now being adopted by ACNI with better training, better skills, and better experience associated with law enforcement.
More specifically, you mentioned better training, procedures, and personnel. More specifically, do you know how ACNI was testing the reliability of Horizon data that the Post Office and then subsequently law enforcement agencies would rely on in a prosecution?
No, I haven't seen how the testing process works.
Do you know what data, which data ACNI was testing?
No, I don't have access to that.
Did you agree with the SEG's decision to decline to approve the submission of the Bartlett paper to the board?
I believe so, yes. It's, I think we found the step and the move pretty significant as a group. We discussed it, obviously, as a group.
Why did you find the step significant?
I think, as I mentioned a little earlier, I was surprised at the number of law enforcement agencies that were engaging with us and the scale of the interest, the 22 and the 33.
So it was the number of cases in which disclosure would or could occur that caused pause for thought?
It caused pause for thought primarily because the team in ACNI is stretched, massively stretched, as we mentioned yesterday, both in terms of its response to the variety of work, both internal investigations of senior colleagues, the assurance work they're providing on loss recovery and discrepancies, as well as the engagement with law enforcement agencies, and in addition to that, the work they're doing on Speak Up. So I think the team was very stretched. This felt like considerably large amounts of work, and I think we wanted to make sure that it was being thoroughly administered.
Did anyone within the SEG disagree with the SEG decision, i.e. they wanted to approve the submission of the paper to the board?
I don't recall the specifics, but I don't think so.
I mean, presumably Mr. Bartlett.
Yes, clearly.
And Ms. Gray, because they had sponsored and written it and proposed it.
Correct, but they're not obviously members of the SEG.
The minutes of the SEG recorded that further work and assurance was required in relation to Horizon data assurance. Can you help, firstly, with what that means?
I think the methodology, I'm slightly speculating, but I think it's the methodology associated with how we are testing Horizon data and how we are assuring ourselves both from an IT, with the IT function, but also with colleagues at Fujitsu, that we have a methodology that is robust.
I mean, one reading of the note, the minutes, is that we've got to satisfy ourselves in-house as to the quality and reliability of our Horizon data before we think about passing it to law enforcement agencies and before we downgrade from the board to two other individuals the permission to do so.
Yes,
that'd be a fair summary.
That would be a fair summary.
Okay.